Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is the News Brief. Today we're going to be talking about the elephant in the room, and that is ceasefire talks in Jeddah between the American delegation and the Ukrainian delegation. And of course, as per usual, please leave your questions, suggestions, comments, thoughts, anything in your mind down below, because that way you don't have to suffer alone, and I don't have to suffer alone. And I always appreciate your feedback and conversation. Let's get it. No one really knew what was going to happen and what was going to come out of these talks in Jeddah. And honestly, part of me is disappointed. Part of me is very introspective on this. Well, actually, let's start with the basics. Ukraine agreed to a 30-day proposed ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. There is also some talk and rumors that are unconfirmed for now that Ukraine is taking its troops out of Kursk, and that there have been the most combat ready troops have been taken out of Kursk a while ago. So that might very well be one of the conditions of the ceasefire. The other thing is US is resuming its intelligence sharing and military supply to Ukraine. However, I don't know if we can technically trust that too much, because I know that with the Trump administration, when Trump decided to pause aid for Ukraine, there were a lot of reports coming out of Poland, which is a major logistics hub for assistance delivery to Ukraine, that tarmacs and other infrastructure to deliver weapons to Ukraine, not only from the US but from other European countries, in the Polish air bases has been being dismantled, which means that the US had zero desire to continue sending aid to Ukraine. But in the meanwhile, before we talk further, let's watch this bit on what happened in Jeddah.
We continue to follow breaking news out of Saudi Arabia, where U.S. and Ukrainian officials have reached a series of agreements about the Russia-Ukraine war, and that includes Ukraine saying it would accept a U.S. proposal calling for an immediate 30-day ceasefire with Russia. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams has more.
Well, the headlines from this joint statement coming out of Saudi Arabia is that Ukraine has agreed to a U.S. proposal to implement a 30-day interim ceasefire, though, of course, that will require Russia's agreement as well. More immediately, the U.S. has agreed to immediately lift the pause on intelligence sharing and the delivery of military aid to Ukraine. Now, that was suspended after an explosive, disastrous meeting recently in Washington between President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine and President Trump. This meeting was clearly aimed at mending fences, at finding common ground, and I think the Ukrainians will be pretty pleased with that result. Remember, from Ukraine's perspective, in recent weeks, the U.S. has gone from being its most important ally, one of its staunchest allies, committing over $100 billion in aid during 3 years of war, to suspending the delivery of military aid, President Trump calling this country's elected president a dictator, and then giving him a very public dressing down at the White House. Ahead of these talks, President Zelensky stressed that Ukraine has wanted peace from the very first second of this war. But at the same time, Ukraine clearly does not want to be pressured into a ceasefire deal that rewards Vladimir Putin with territory, Ukrainian territory, and leaves the door open to him invading once again in future, because that has happened before in this country. As part of any long-term ceasefire deal, it's clear that Ukraine still very much wants security guarantees, including from the United States, to make sure that Vladimir Putin thinks twice. Back to you.
Holly Williams, thank you. I want to bring in Mark Cancian. He's a senior advisor with the Defense and Security Department at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mark, do we know yet what this 30-day ceasefire proposal looks like, or do terms still need to be hammered out?
Well, terms need to be hammered out for every element of this announcement, including the 30-day ceasefire. But the major elements are contained in that phrase. In other words, it's an in-place ceasefire. It will go for 30 days. It could be extended, and could be extended for an extended period of time, depending on how long negotiations go on.
So the U.S. says it will resume sharing intel with Ukraine. Do you think there's a risk they could pull it again?
I think that that's always a risk, but this is a very good sign for Ukraine. That is, that it has convinced the United States that it's willing to participate in negotiations. The United States has resumed this support so Ukraine can continue its resistance. The future's uncertain, but the ball is now in Russia's court. And if Russia does not make some concessions, they are the ones who will likely feel Trump's wrath.
So President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, is headed to Russia this week. Obviously, there's a lot that needs to be ironed out with Russia. How do you feel Russia is going to take this development, and what do you think they're going to ask for in return?
It's key what Russia responds with. So far, Russia has not indicated any interest in making concessions. They felt that they were winning the war. They felt that President Trump had now essentially backed their side. They had become even more expansive in their demands. So they will need to reevaluate their position. Trump will need to get them to do that and to make some concessions, for example, acknowledging the validity of Ukraine as a state in order for these talks to be successful.
Well, Mark Kantian, clearly still a lot to be discussed, but some positive movements potentially toward a peace deal today. Thank you for joining us on this news.
Now, there's obviously going to be a lot of speculation about what's going to come out of it. You know, there was a Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson coming out of Ukraine and saying that, you know, this was one of the most difficult talks that Ukraine had to ever participate in. There was a lot said, there was a lot done. It was an 8-hour conversation. And he tried to make it sound like, you know, there were some things that we had to agree to that we didn't necessarily want to very much, but also he does think that we stood our ground, and at the end of the day we got the best possible result for ourselves. So of course a lot of Ukrainians find the mineral deal between the US and Ukraine that was a part of this negotiation to be a terrible deal for Ukraine, so we're not necessarily too happy with it proceeding. But I will say that, you know, for the first time in history, in modern Ukrainian history, I do want to say that this administration does seem to have our best interests in mind. And I don't think they're stupid enough to sign something knowing that this is going to be detrimental to our country. First of all, one thing that I want to lay out there immediately is that Ukraine definitely does not trust the US in the form in which the US exists today. Ukraine also does not trust Russia. There doesn't seem to be any specific security guarantees that came out of the United States for Ukraine out of this peace negotiation, and largely this negotiation is still ongoing. The spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs also did say that, you know, the results and the main points that were discussed in this negotiation are not going to come out for the next couple of years, at least, to the general public, so we will not know what was being discussed. However, while the more precise terms are going to be discussed, we're obviously going to be hearing more. It's not like we're going to be blinded by what's going to happen, but definitely everything that happened between these closed doors is not going to come out for a while because it's classified. I will say that Ukraine has done some things before these peace talks that were signifying that Ukraine is not going to back down and that we're still not willing to, you know, get peace for the sake of peace on Russia's terms and rewarding Russia. First of all, there was a huge drone strike on Moscow the day before the negotiation took place. And of course, our favorite far right, but pretending to be neutral and pretending to be well-wishing and humanitarian blogger Lex Friedman was in Moscow because he is allegedly interviewing Putin soon. And while he was there, he posted a heartfelt message about how it was terrifying to be in Moscow when Ukraine was bombing it and there were drones flying, and there was something that exploded quite close to where he was staying.
I'm in Moscow now, traveling to Saudi Arabia soon. This mass drone attack hit very close to where I am located. I'm okay. When I traveled to Ukraine, there were a few close calls, and same in Moscow now. These are not actions of two sides that are pushing for peace. Nevertheless, I pray for a long-lasting peace agreement soon. I have been doing my small part in pushing for that with all parties involved.
Which is kind of funny because the whole world is mobilizing against Ukraine with this strike on Moscow, yet no one, including Lex Friedman, who was here when Russia was doing this to Ukraine, but not with a couple of drones or not with just drones. It was missiles, both ballistic and cruise missiles. And it was also drones. And it was happening every single day that Lex Friedman was here. And every single day for the past 3 years, he didn't feel like that deserved a tweet and that deserved condemning or calling out Russia. However, he did feel like, a strike on Moscow did deserve calling out and condemning Ukraine. And this is how these sort of bloggers and general media in general shapes your opinions. But what I was trying to say about this is that I think Ukraine did this drone strike, which, hey, we still haven't officially said that it was by us, but all things point to it. Ukraine did this drone strike to show the hypocrisy of Russia because every time someone says Ukraine is not ready for peace talks, Putin, that day, that night, because every day, bombs Ukrainian cities with ballistic missiles. So who really isn't ready for peace talks, Russia or Ukraine? It's always Russia because, bombing civilian population is not signifying peace talks, right? However, when Trump was saying that he's not going to give Ukraine air defense because he wants us to agree to negotiations, basically, die or submit. I think one of our cabinet leaders came out and said, oh, well, this should push Russia to want peace more, right? Basically, making a play on the whole concept of, oh, really? I guess Russia is so ready to peace talks that it bombs us every day. So this is our way of showing that we're ready for peace talks by bombing, right? Or by sending drones on Moscow, because that's how you do it these days. So I do believe that's part of the situation. And I do think it was a brilliant move because it also shows that Ukraine is not weak. It shows that Ukraine is not meek. And it shows that Ukraine is going to be standing its ground in the face of all the pressure that both the United States and Russia have been throwing our way. Also, Ukraine did say that Europe has to partake in these peace agreement talks. And now the ball is in Russia's court to either accept this 30-day ceasefire or not accept this 30-day ceasefire. Now, interestingly, of course, we have been saying the whole time that any agreements with Russia signify nothing because Russia doesn't adhere to any agreements. So someone can say, so why did you accept them then? Well, here is what I think. I think that, of course, usually when we did agree to documents, to certain predicaments with Russia, we were hoping that Russia would stick by its word and actually adhere to them. This time, we definitely are not as naive and we fully expect them to break the agreement, which I honestly think that what Ukraine is doing by showing that we're ready to sign this with Russia is showing the world that it's not us who doesn't want peace, it's Russia, because the first step to peace is Russia taking its troops out of Ukraine, and showing the world that, listen, look, we're going to sign this. We're going to sign this beautifully brokered deal by the United States, right? Like, the one that Trump says would be the only thing that could end the war because he's so good at that, right? And then Russia's going to break it. And we're going to say, we told you so. This is one of the possibilities as to why this deal went through. I think that Russia might not adhere to this deal as per usual. In fact, I expect them to break the ceasefire agreement as ASAP, maybe a week into it. I don't know. Like, I don't see it lasting 30 days. Another thing is, as I said, Ukraine doesn't necessarily trust the United States in the shape that the United States is today because, well, obviously, Trump has not shown any remorse for Ukraine or any willingness to help Ukraine. He has shown willingness to help Russia. And we're going to get to that tweet in a second. So I think now that we're not as naive in, trusting the US and trusting Russia's intentions in signing these agreements, Ukraine might take these 30 days to rearm and be ready. So what we expect Russia to do is not adhere to the ceasefire, but remobilize, rearm, and attack further. I think this time Ukraine is going to take the same strategy. We're not going to be sleeping on it. We're not going to be expecting peace. We're, in fact, going to be expecting to be betrayed, because that's what happened every time. And of course, Ukraine is not going to sign any documents that give Russia any legal and any legitimate ownership over the occupied territories. And all of this talk of like giving them Kherson and Zaporizhia and all of this stuff is just terrible. Also, there are quite a few Ukrainian bloggers that, or sort of Twitter personas, that have been the big voices from Ukraine that are like, opposition from the beginning of the full scale invasion. One of them is this girl named Yulia Mendel or something like that. And I have been saying that she's a pro Russian actor from the very beginning when I've seen her first tweets. And now it is incredibly evident, because her job and the job of people like her is to discredit Zelensky, and is to say that, our media is corrupt and is not showing you what's really happening. She recently put out the tweet that most Ukrainians are ready to give up land in exchange for peace, and are ready to give Putin Zaporizhia and Kherson and all of these other places.
A huge number of Ukrainians are ready for a truce now. But it is extremely difficult to publish this point of view. Legacy media publish only those activists and journalists who support the Ukrainian government's message. I live in Ukraine, and I don't think this is the only opinion here.
She's trying to make it sound like, everyone, this coherent group of people, which is a lot of people on both social media and media coming from Ukraine, are just like government actors, and they're lying to you about the real intentions. But the reality is, if I were to come out on the street right now and ask, I don't know, the first 20 people, it wouldn't be most Ukrainians who would give you this answer, because it's not true. She and people like her are trying to show you a divisive part, or trying to show you a semblance of division, because that plays into Putin, and that plays into his agenda, and it plays into these peace talks. Now, the interesting thing is, Trump did say that if Russia is not going to be forced into accepting the ceasefire agreement, then Ukraine is going to be armed, and the war is going to continue with fuller force, and that Trump is going to back Ukraine in a much more severe campaign against Russia. Which is very interesting, because do I trust that? Like, no, not really. I don't trust that. I think that Ukraine is trying to play this game where, since Trump did say that, and I'm sure this was brought up in the negotiation, Ukraine was like, really? Okay, let's do it, because we know Russia's going to break the ceasefire. Like, we know that's what's going to happen. So if Russia is forced into a ceasefire but breaks it, does that still apply to Trump, going ham on Russia and letting Ukraine fight back with like 1,000% force, because that's what he said? I don't think he's going to do that, because he's going to find any excuse to not do that. And I will bring up, how back in the day, I guess a year ago or 2 years ago, when a drone would fall on NATO territory, or a missile would enter NATO airspace, or there would be Russian drones in NATO airspace, or there would be Russian jets in NATO airspace, right? That's a violation of, that's a territorial violation, and that should, in fact, trigger a response. But no response would be triggered, because they would be like, oh, it was just 5 seconds. Oh, it was just a very little amount of time. So I expect really nothing out of this. And I don't necessarily expect this to be, I don't trust Trump. And I don't think anyone should, to be honest, because in reality, he's not thinking about anyone or anyone's benefit but his own. There is a big debate between him being a Manchurian candidate and between him just basically being a useful idiot who thinks that he can end the war in whatever means possible, and working on his ego and thinking that, Putin actually respects him, so he has that power. And I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's him having this sort of man crush on Putin, and, doing everything to appease Russia, because, as this big, amazing world leader who's so strong, who respects him, which it's not true. He's just using him. And the other part of it is Trump kind of having sympathies for Russia because of all of his connections with Russia and all of the things that have been coming out, with his former wife Ivana having connections to Russia and her dad working for the KGB. I mean, there is so much here. And of course, there is a part of it. I don't want to like jump on conspiracy theories, so I'm not going to say Trump is a Russian asset before or unless there is any concrete proof or more concrete proof. But at the same time, like, it wouldn't be uncanny because everything he has done since he stepped his foot in the office is aided Russia by taking it, by just taking power away from Ukraine and laying all of Ukraine's cards on the table before even negotiating, and basically giving us the worst position to negotiate from. And it was really us who brought us back to a good standing to negotiate. So, yeah, I mean, it is really hard to sort of predict what's going to happen because there is very little that we know about what happened in this negotiation. But I can tell you with certainty that Russia is going to break a ceasefire, even if it agrees to it. If they don't agree to it, then they're well. There is also the possibility that they're not going to agree to it, because of course they might come out with the most ridiculous conditions for this ceasefire that of course Ukraine is not going to accept, because they're going to be the most unfavorable conditions for Ukraine imaginable. So we will see how it goes, but as I said, one thing that I'll tell you for certain is that Russia is going to try and sabotage this and turn it over onto Ukraine and make Ukraine look like we are not willing to have peace. And it might be either through breaking a ceasefire and then trying to pin it on us like they did every single time, or coming out with extremely unreasonable demands in order to achieve a ceasefire, or really, I mean, sabotage or information warfare. I mean, there is so much information online today that is evidently coming from Russia. I already see this on TikTok, on YouTube, on all platforms. Russian bots have become a lot more active. There is, of course, this whole change the president narrative, because Russia wants a president that's going to kneel in front of Putin, and Zelensky is not it. And also, I do want to say, I know it's a tangent, but I do want to say here that the reason why Russia wants Zelensky off so badly, and the reason why Trump wants Zelensky off so badly, is because Zelensky doesn't cave. Is because Zelensky has a backbone. And they don't like that, because they want someone that they can control, both Russia and the US. And Zelensky is not that. And that's why they really, really want him gone, because he actually stands his ground. But yeah, please be diligent. Please be vigilant. Don't trust disinformation. I do know that, the Ukrainian government, whatever the proposal was and whatever they agreed on, they definitely have contingency plans, and they're doing that with the idea of the best possible outcome for the Ukrainian people. And if these conditions come out and they're not very favorable, then again, there is definitely a back thought and a plan behind it. I hope this was helpful. Let me know if it was. I always love hearing from you in the comments. And as per usual, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications so you don't miss when the next one comes out. And, leave your thoughts, questions, suggestions, anything that's on your mind down below. Like this episode, send it to a friend, and I will see you next time.